Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video we have a little bit of Retribution Paladin content coming for you. It's been a little while because there hasn't been any updates or any kind of news with Retribution Paladins. This isn't really news or updates either, but I do think it's kind of relevant, especially in the WoW community. Yesterday, Max from Liquid, he's like the top WoW only streamer, because I would say Asmongold streams other things as well. And he's Race to World First community, leader of Liquid Guild, stuff like that. And he has on periodically different people from different classes and specs to give their opinions about the state of that spec or how they think they're going to perform. In this case, he's doing a tier list for it as well, just probably for the memes, for the clicks, whatever, doing a tier list for it as well. He doesn't always do a tier list for it. And he had on Bolas to discuss the Retribution Paladin. Anytime I mention him, Bolas, it's always pretty much glowingly. I think he does a great job with everything he does. I think in particular, if I wanted to highlight one thing, the priority of abilities that he works on, I think is absolutely wonderful. And does a great work there. And I think he gives a pretty fair assessment of Ret. A little bit angry, and I think that anger is justified. And he's going. You can tell by the the thumbnail that he does not rate us very well, and that I think that's completely justified. It's not necessarily where I would have said if I was being completely just honest, but I think it's completely justified, and we'll get into why. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being too rose-colored glasses there. And after I react to this clip here of the stream, it's just a really short clip, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about specifics and nuance of why Ret is kind of bad or perceived to be bad and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and play the clip of Max talking to Bolas.
Everyone going like, oh man, my spec got so much cool stuff going into Dragonflight, like all these great changes, and I'm like, fuck. I was getting riled up, like thinking about how shit they treated Red.
Yeah.
It's
no.
Yeah, there's basically nothing positive I can say about it. Like all the design decisions and everything they've made has just been awful.
Oh no.
There's like
oh no, Max says.
The rotation doesn't feel fun to play. It's super bloated and stagnant. Your defense.
I wouldn't say the rotation.
Both like.
I wouldn't say the rotation's bloated, but it's like it is more than a lot of other classes. I'll say that. The other stuff, the upkeep is annoying too. There's other things that go into it.
Among the worst out of any melee. You don't bring anything like that's really valuable to a raid setting. I don't really see a reason why anyone would want to play raid.
The most scathing review of any class all day. So maybe something for Blizzard to look out for.
Yeah.
They just really need to rework it ASAP. As in my opinion. I mean, maybe they think differently, but yeah,
I definitely think Ret was definitely one of the later Paladin was one of the later trees released and needed the most work for the most amount of time. And I just think they were just one of the few. I think most of the talent trees in this game are actually great, as you heard most of these people talking about them. And the gameplay is great. There were a few specs left behind that are kind of like looking forward to 10.1, unfortunately, because they just had to move on to the tuning part. And this Ret definitely seems like one of them for sure. That being said, you had an excellent note in your article about Ret that I'll.
So he's going to paraphrase it, I guess, but basically saying that, just because a spec isn't designed well, it could still do really high damage, and a spec that is designed well could do really low damage. But then Bolas kind of shoots that down as well.
Which is, that's not necessarily saying that Ret will be bad if it has not great. And then a really bad class, like literally pressing one button ever, like the worst possible scenario, you could do top damage, right? Like it doesn't really mean that you're tuning. So how do you feel about the tuning of Ret currently?
I don't have a great grasp on what other classes' numbers are like for raid. My impression was that Ret was quite good early on in the beta, and then it got some pretty massive nerfs, and there was like a bug fix where there was a consecration talent that was increasing all your holy damage by 10%. They got bug fixed after they nerfed it, so it's like kind of got over nerfed more than what they were intending originally. So my impression is still that it's like not above average for DPS, but if it does end up overtuned, you might still see people play Ret because damage is damage.
You can see Max kind of thinking that it's going to go B then, because average in this tier list is like A, right? Average in this tier list is A, so he's like, I'll put it in B. But you're not counting all the other bad stuff that you said about the gameplay.
But I don't think it's very likely to happen that it ends up being overtuned based on what I currently see. I mean, maybe they buff it. But...
Yeah, sure. What is your opinion on their, like, if you had to put it anywhere, combining both of them?
Like in ranking?
Mm-hmm.
Swamp Ass.
You think Red Swamp Ass?
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure.
Okay, now at least no tier is alone by themselves. Wow. No, they're saying always has been. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that is wild. All right,
I mean,
so
like you look at other specs. There's times where
He basically just goes on to say that Rhett has not been flavor of the month since Wrath of the Lich King, and that's pretty much correct as far as that goes. So overall, like I said, I generally agree with what Bolas was saying there, pretty much in everything. I think he was a little bit, annoyed, like he said he was, because of hearing how everyone else kind of likes their class trees and talent trees and spec trees and stuff like that. And Rhett's did not get much love. It pretty much got crapped on and never got any love. They did move a talent point where I suggested them to move it, which was very key, but then they nerfed the crap out of that functionality. So it is what it is, I guess. So let's talk about why, though, right? So he didn't get a chance to talk in why. He only had 3 minutes to talk or whatever on Max's stream. Let's talk a little bit why Rhett is so bad and why Rhett is perceived to be so bad. So something, I was inspired since I was watching a Max video to do it this way. He often does these little spreadsheets on his stream talking about things, and I basically have the melee classes here. Hopefully I didn't forget one. That'd be embarrassing. But I have Rhett, Rogue, Warrior, Havoc, Monk, Survival, Feral, Enhance, and DK on here. I'm going to be talking about the defense and mobility, the utility, and then the damage, and I'm going to give them a score. The scores are made up by, if I think something's bad, it's a 0. If I think something's meh, it's a 1. If I think that something is good, it's a 2. Now if I think something is giga, it's a 3. Like just really, really good. And I combine defense and mobility. The reason I do this, I think these often are hand in hand with one each other, right? So if your mobility is really high, that can sometimes make up for you not having the most defense. If your defense is super high, that can sometimes make up for you not having mobility. The problem with Red, of course, is that our defense and mobility are both fairly low. In some cases, extremely low. In fact, the only 0 that I give in this really is for Rhett's mobility, because it's the only thing that doesn't have a special mobility. We basically have a crappy sprint that's on the GCD and is just not that good. And yeah, you can be slowed during it. You can be whatever, pushed back. It's not great. It's the worst mobility, at least for melee, I believe, in the game. So yeah, that's why I gave that a 0. So I combine defense plus mobility, add them together. Now I would normally average this, so I have a 1 for defense for Rat and a 0 for mobility. So that would be technically like a 0.5, rounded up to a 1, I guess. This isn't scientific, folks, right? A lot of this is my opinion. Knowledge goes into it, but it's a lot of my opinion, right? And so they get a 1 for defense plus mobility. Utility, I do give a 2. Why? Only because some things are useful for certain fights. There are certain raid fights or Mythic Plus dungeons where a bop is useful, where a Blessing of Freedom is useful, where having immunity is useful. These things do come in handy. It's not giga by any means, but it is somewhat useful. You can also bring Devo Aura if for some reason you don't have a Holy Paladin and a Mythic Plus group. You can spec into Devo Aura for your Mythic Plus. You're losing something else, of course, with that talent point, but you can do that. You're losing damage as well by not running your Retribution Aura, but you can do that. So you do bring some utility, or you can bring some utility, and I would say it's a good amount of utility when you factor in every single thing. Now, for a random fight, your utility might be a 1 or a 0 for a random raid fight, but for another raid fight, it might be a 3, right? So I think two's pretty fair there. For damage, I'm having us at a 1 right now. I would say it's probably 1.5, but I rounded up for defense mobility, so I just kind of rounded down for damage. I'd say damage is probably more reasonably a 1.5 right in the middle, like mediocre, but I rounded down to a 1, again, just because I rounded up for the other one, right? So that gives us a total of 4. Now keep that in mind when we go through the other ones at where we are here. So we have Rogue. Now Rogue has 3 specs, and if you only play 1 spec, you might fight against some of this, right? Well, the reality is when you play Ret Paladin, you're playing Paladin, but you want to be a DPS, right? That means if you didn't play Ret Paladin, you'd be probably playing another one of these specs or something, or classes, and you wouldn't care what spec you were. You just want to play DPS. Now I understand for like a rogue, you might only like subtlety, and so you might well, my subtlety rogue doesn't have that. But I don't care about that because that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the class in general and what you can do. So for rogue, for defense plus mobility, we have Giga. Have great mobility with Shadow Step. They do have Sprint. It might not be the best. Again, it's just a sprint. It's not great, but Shadow Step is obviously very, very good. Allows for super high uptime. Very high defense with Feint, with having a cheat death in general. It could be quite strong. Cloak of Shadows on a lower cooldown than like Divine Shield or whatever. Utility, I do give it 2. They actually bring a raid debuff now as well with decreasing the damage done by a boss. The Cloak of Shadows, again, can be used for utility as well. That in that case, it would not be a defensive as much. But again, it has a lower cooldown, so you can technically use it as both in the same raid fight. So it is both. And then for damage, I gave it a 2 because I guarantee at least one of the rogue specs will be good damage. And that adds up to a 7. So you see the total for rogue is already almost double that of a rep paladin. We go warrior, so it's going to be arms or fury or combined, whatever. Defensive plus mobility. They don't have the most defensive, but they do have good, solid defensives, and they have very good mobility. Heroic Leap Charge back in is one of the most powerful things. You also have like Intervene and stuff like that. So you have very, very good mobility. Defense is kind of normal. If it was just mobility, maybe it would be a 3, but because you're combining defense, I gave it a 2. So that's where I have warrior. Utility, obviously they have battle shout, they have commanding shout. These are very important things for a raid team, especially. So utility, I have a 2. Commanding shout just being so powerful, it's hard not to give them at least a 2, at least a good. Remember, 2 just means good. So I gave them a 2 for utility. And then for damage, again, I guarantee fury or arms will be at least average or above average. So give a 2 there, and they equal a 6. So again, 6 bigger than 4. Havoc DH. Now this one's a little bit gross, I guess. Havoc DH. Defensive plus mobility, 3. They have very good defensives. They have very good mobility. Utility, 3. Why? Because they bring the magic debuff. You pretty much always want a Demon Hunter in your raid group, no matter what. Demon Hunter is very important. So 3 for utility. They also bring, the I don't know why the ability name is slipping my mind, but the darkness on the ground might just be called darkness. But you're allowed, that can be a very, very strong in some fights. Some fights it's not as strong, of course. But utility, I gave a 3 because it's just pretty much you need one in your group anyways. And yeah, there you go. And damage right now for Havoc is very, very high, so I gave it a 3. Of course, that could be tuned to be lower, but that puts us at a resounding 9 points for Havoc, and that actually is the top score out of this. By the way, I did the scores, right? Windwalker Monk, we have defense plus mobility. Mobility super, super high. Defense decently good, especially in PvE content. So we have a 2 there. Utility, again, now they don't have a ton of utility. Monks do not, Windwalker monks, but they do bring the melee debuff. By the same argument that I did for the magic debuff for Havoc, I could have given it a 3 by that same logic. For whatever reason with darkness, I like darkness a lot. Maybe I'm just biased towards it. And because they have that, I gave them a 3 and the monk a 2. And then for damage, right now, monk damage is really, really good despite the nerfs. You could argue that it'll probably just be a 2. I have it as a 3 right now. Maybe it goes down to a 2. But so it's at a 7 or a 6. Either way, still higher than Ret. For DK, the defense plus mobility, I have as a 3. Why? Because now you might be like, but the mobility is so bad on a DK. Death's Advance is an extremely strong ability, and you can talent in to make it better in Dragonflight. So the mobility is actually quite good in many, many situations. It's a very strong mobility cooldown that's helpful in a lot of ways. Defensives are just really, really good for DK. They're at least a 3 giga there. I think between the two, it'd be like a 2.5, and I would definitely round up in this case to a 3, and that's why I gave them a 3. Utility with Death Grip, obviously, with AMZ, with being able to clear different things by even using Death's Advance again. Just very, very good utility for DKs. Now it is, sometimes you don't need a grip, I guess, right? But they brings very unique utility. So I gave that a 3 as well. And damage, I think they're probably more like average, kind of like Rat right now, kind of 1.5-ish. Maybe they're more 2. I know that they've had some tweaks since the last time I was really playing a lot on the beta. Maybe so I was thinking 1.5 and for the same, and I kind of rounded down for the damage like I did on Rat. But I have them at a 7. Maybe you could argue an 8, or maybe you would argue with me over the first one. But 7 I think is pretty fair. For DK, still higher than Ret. Enhance, we actually get a few here, getting closer back to Ret. Enhance, defensive plus mobility. I really love Enhance's mobility overall with the Feral Lunge. Ghost Wolf, is not like epic or anything like that. And so that's only a 2. Their defensive button is only like just a regular defensive button, but it is pretty strong. You could argue maybe a 1 here for the defensive plus mobility. I gave it a 2, just because I think it's pretty good. Maybe 1.5 again. You have to round it one way or the other. For utility, obviously they have heroism. They have all kinds of totems. Whether that's Windrush totem, whether that's Wind Fury totem. You might even be able to argue a 3 there. Again, any of these that you can argue, I think I was as fair as possible. And so this one, maybe you could argue a 3. Maybe the defensive mobility you argue a 1, but they still adds up to 4 either way. So I give them a 2 there. And then for their damage, enhancement damage, they did get that really big nerf. I still see them to be pretty strong overall, and I'm giving them a 2, and that's where I think that they will end up, totaling up to 6. Again, still much higher than Rat. So far, we haven't even had a 5. So right now, Rat's just by far the worst. For Feral, I think the reason why Feral's left out so often is simply because Boom Kids do everything and they do it better, right? It'd be like if there was a ranged Ret spec, right? And the ranged Ret spec was good. And so no one would bring the melee Ret when you have a ranged Ret. And I think that's just kind of the way people look at it. And so Feral is kind of, looked down upon, but it's really sometimes because their damage is low, which I give them a 1 for damage. And then a lot of times it's just because the Boomkin is better. So for defensive plus mobility, I gave it a 3. I don't know everything about their defensives in Dragonflight. I just know that Druids are super tanky in Shadowlands right now. Well, not just right now. Pre-patch is broken, but in Shadowlands in general. Mobility, obviously, really good for Feral overall as well. So I give them a 3 there. For utility, I give them a 2. No raid buff or anything like that. But actually, I think they have Mark of the Wild now, too, so that could even be a 3. I was forgetting Mark of the Wild. I believe that they have that. I could be wrong there. Again, I'm not an expert on all these classes. I know Mark of the Wild's back, though, so Feral have that. You could maybe argue a 3 for Feral, but at least a 2. And then for damage, I have a 1. I don't know exactly what their damage profile is. Again, it's probably closer to a 1.5. Well, let's round down to 1, and that will equal out to a 6 for Feral. Now, survival. Survival is something that actually, and Feral too. Feral, gets left out just like Ret does. But again, I think it's mostly because of the Boomkin problem, right? For survival, I think survival often gets left out again because their range specs are just generally better. But I will say that they are kind of closer to Ret, and they end up having the same total as Ret in this. So in their defensive plus mobility, I give them a 2. Not heavy defensively at all. They can die. Mobility, obviously, on Hunters is really, really good. You can do most of your stuff while you're moving. While they're a melee that gets to play at range, essentially, for survival. So they have a 2 there. Utility, they don't bring a ton of utility to the raid. They have an immune, right? Maybe a trap can be quite good for certain fights and stuff like that. So utility, I only have as a 1. And then damage, I have as a 1 on survival. Again, that could be a 1.5 or a 2 or something like that, right? So maybe it's a little bit higher, but I rounded that down. I was kind of safe on a lot of these, rounding down on the damage. Since I don't know their damage profiles perfectly, I rounded down a lot on the damage. And so that equals 4-2, just like Ret. But, we saw in Shadowlands Season 3 or whatever, that survival had to be completely broken on damage. Their damage had to be a 3, a 3, like a 4 almost, right? Like Warlock and Hunter damage was like a 4, breaking my scale. And that's how they got to play, essentially. And so while their damage is a 1, there's no way they're going to get in. And I think the same thing kind of goes for Ret, right? If our damage was a 3, then all of a sudden we're a 6, and, maybe we ignore the lack of defensive and mobility. Or maybe we're like, hey, look, hey, guys, we have good defensive. Look at our Dusk. We take less damage if we do our Dusk perfectly. And, we get more, it's not that we get into raids, right? Like, I raid, but, like, you get more respect or whatever from the community, maybe if your damage is a lot higher. So I think that could be kind of the issue with Ret is the tuning. I think we need to be higher in damage. I think we need to be in that A or S tier of damage. We need to be a 2 or 3 of damage to kind of warrant having respect in the community when you compare us to all the other melee classes. When it comes to a raid, you just want to fill in with other things. You're going to bring a monk. Let's say you don't have, let's say your tanks are like, let's say you have a bear tank and a DK tank, I guess, right? Let's just, since they're right there. So for your melee spots, you bring a rogue for the DR, you bring a warrior for battle shout and for commanding shout, you bring a havoc for magic debuff, you bring a monk for melee debuff, and then maybe you bring an enhance to help them out with Wind Fury Totem. And, let's say you have 5 melee, then that's your 5 melee. And it's pretty much not even close. Why would you bring the Ret in that situation? You could say maybe immunity, right? So maybe you swap it out for a boss where you need an immunity, but like Ret just doesn't kind of fit in to the paradigm right now whatsoever. If their damage is super high, then all of a sudden you can kind of force fit it anywhere. Obviously, if their defensive mobility is super high and their damage is still low, then that kind of puts them into the Feral category where Holy is just better. Just like Boomkin is just better than Feral in many cases. That's just kind of the way they make the game. Now, I'm not saying that inherently the spec is better, but that's just kind of the way they make the game. So, with all of this is why Ret is rated in Swamp Tier. It's because we are the lowest on the totem pole, or at least tied for the lowest on the totem pole of melee. And for whatever reason, Blizzard does not realize this. I think they see things like Lay on Hands and Bubble and stuff like that and Bop, and they don't realize that a lot of times in an encounter especially, these things need to be used within 30 seconds of each other. For whatever reason, we're the only class, if you think about this, we're the only class that has something like Forbearance that doesn't allow us, that puts a debuff on us that doesn't allow us to use our defensives, right? So not only can I not, so let's say I have to save my bubble for a mechanic, right? I'm saving, so our utilities are highest score on this for me. But let's say I'm saving my bubble for a mechanic that I have to soak with my bubble. Whether that's a Guardian thing, like a Guardian, the first one's in Sepulcher or whatever. Or is that Sepulcher? I can't even think of what raid that's in. It might be Sanctum. But the Guardian of the first one's boss where you have to soak with the tanks or whatever for the strategy that everyone uses. And so I'm saving my bubble for that. Now, if I'm about to die before that, and I have to, and I use my Lay on Hands, now all of a sudden I go to soak and I don't have my bubble. And so essentially I can't use my Lay on Hands at a time period where I really might need to use it, because I will then not be able to use my bubble when I have to use it. And so I don't think they factor that in. I think Blizzard thinks that the utility for Ret is like a 3 or like, super giga 4, and it's not. It's like a 2, or some people would probably say it's a 1 even. I think spell warding, even though, that probably gives Forbearance too. I guess I can't remember if it does or not. But adding that in probably would have put us to a 3. But I think they think we're at a 4 for utility, and we're not. We're at like a 2, and a lot of it's because of Forbearance. And I don't think that gets enough talk, honestly. Defense mobility, I don't know. I think they think Horse is good, no matter how much we tell them it's not. I think they think Horse is good. I think they think defense is good because of Word of Glory. However, Word of Glory, again, out of all these things, we're the only ones that have to spend our our holy power, our ability power, to have a defensive. That I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Everyone else's defensive is just a button they get to press. We have to spend holy power to use our WoG defensive. So I think that's complete crap. I think that they view that as higher. But again, when you compare it to every other melee, it isn't fair. It isn't correct. And then damage. Damage. We usually have high damage at some point, and then we're usually nerfed all the way to the ground, and the damage is never allowed to be good. So when nothing is allowed to be good, maybe because they're overvaluing some other things, then you get this super low score. And when you compare it to everything else, Ret is swamp ass. So that's why Ret is swamp ass. Please, Blizzard. Please Blizzard. Think about helping us out here. Give us back spell warding. Give us a better defensive button, or 2 defensive buttons to press instead of 1. Make don't make us have to actually use brain power for a defensive in Dusk, where nobody else has to use brain power. None of these other specs have to use brain power, just us for a defensive. And then damage, the least you could have done is give us good damage, and yet you had to nerf that pretty significantly as well. Again, you can argue it's a 2 instead of a 1, but again, I rounded up essentially for the first row instead of making it a 0, so I rounded down on that. But yeah, a little bit depressing, I will admit, but this is the things Blizzard needs to fix with Ret, and they aren't doing it, and that's why we are where we are. And all I can do as a content creator is make content about it and highlight it. All Bolas can do is continue to go on platform when Max gives him that platform, to continue to post in the Discord as he does, to continue to put in his guides specific things, like go out of his way to put those things in. And there's other people too. There's on Hearthstone, on Icy Veins. There's all kinds of other people who are doing Ret content. There's people that do PvP Ret content that I'm sure point to some of these things. I know PvP and PvE are completely different in a lot of ways, but I'm sure some of the things overlap there as well. And that's all we can do. I've made forums posts about it. That's something anybody can do. You can go on the forums and make a post about it. But this is what you want to talk about when you are discussing it, right? No, instead of just saying Ret sucks, point out that the damage is lower still than, is it going to be lower than all 6 of these? Probably not. Is it going to be lower than 4 of them? Probably, or maybe even 5, maybe. So our damage is low. Our utility is average. It's not as good as they think it is. Bring up forbearance in that. I can't use Lay on Hands and Bubble, and I might have to save my bubble for a certain time. And so there's a huge damage event before I have to use my bubble, and I'm not allowed to use my Lay on Hands for it, right? Bring up forbearance. That matters. Defense mobility. I mean, we've been beating this one into the ground forever with defense mobility. I think the least they could do is give us spell warding, let our utility be a 3, and then tune our damage up. And then that would put us at a 6 or a 7. So I think that's the very least they could do. If you look at this, spell warding plus giga damage, and I think the class is fine, the spec is fine, but currently it isn't. It really isn't. So that's it for this one, guys. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. Helps me out so much. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.